Hey y'all, it's Bart, and welcome to Soccer for Us. On this episode, I am not talking about the U.S. men's national team roster yet. I know you were waiting for that episode, but I did want to give time to talk about the U.S. women's national team's friendlies in September. Obviously, life has been going a lot lately for me, starting a new job and all that kind of stuff. Still figuring out the best times to record podcasts. So just bear with me. I'm sorry this one's coming out fairly late, but I do think that it is a discussion worth having. And as you can tell by the title of this episode, the question I'm asking is it productive for the U.S. women's national team to play Cupcake Friendlies? Now, a lot of people have different opinions on that, and we're going to get into that as we move through the episode. But before we do that, I do need to remind you to subscribe to Soccer Down Here on whatever podcatcher you are listening right now. That way you can get every episode of Soccer for Us, including a roster release reaction episode. Yes, we will have an episode talking about the U.S. men's national team October World Cup qualifying roster in the next couple days. So just be patient. I promise it's coming. So make sure you subscribe to catch that and all the other great content that comes out on the SDH network. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter at SoccerForUsPod. That way you can interact with me and the comments that I make on Twitter. I try to retweet some things and add my own analysis to news when it comes out. And I also come out with my own things when needed, especially a lot of U.S. women's national team stuff, because unfortunately there's just not a whole lot of commentators on it. There's a lot of reporters, but not a whole lot of commentators. So trying to bolster that community on Twitter. So again, please follow us at SoccerForUsPod. Now, let's talk about the U.S. women's national team and their two friendlies against Paraguay in September. They played a pair of friendlies at home. They won on aggregate 17-0. That sounds great, right? That is an unmitigated success on the field. It was a fairly entertaining watch, but at no point were these matches in question, right? This was not a stressful environment for anyone. The U.S. scored in the third and fourth minutes of the respective contests. It was 6-0 at halftime of the first match, 5-0 at intermission of the second. And, you know, while it was fun to watch the U.S. women's national team bang home goals, and I personally had some fun watching them and matching them shot for a goal, it just was very apparent that these friendlies were not competitive. And a lot of people wondered if they were even worthwhile. I think this question is worth pondering. It's because it's a little bit more complicated than most fans want to admit, right? We'll get into some of those, but the TLDR of what I'm going to talk about is that, unfortunately, the women's game still has a gulf in quality between teams ranked in the top 10 and teams ranked outside of the top 10. The United States is the number one women's team in the world, and whether you like to, bash them for only a bronze medal in Tokyo, they still are the twice reigning world champions and finished third at the next best international tournament. They're still the top team. They're still the top dogs. But I think the problem, too, is that the U.S. does play in a region that does not invest as well into the women's game as it does. And it is also in a hemisphere that honestly lacks in development in women's football. So you're going to have games like this, unfortunately. And also, again, the U.S. are really good, and unfortunately, scorelines like this are going to happen. So that's the summation of what I'm going to talk about. But before we really get into kind of the analysis of that question of are these even productive, I do want to just quickly go through the timeline of the games. On Thursday, September 16th, the U.S. women's national team beat Paraguay 9-0. Carly Lloyd scored 5 goals, Andy Sullivan scored 2, and Lynn Williams and Tobin Heath each got 1. Somehow, Paraguay managed 26% possession, but their 46% passing accuracy was a little bit more telling of how inept they were at really making anything happen for themselves. The U.S. outshot Paraguay 32-1. This was, again, not competitive. Carly Lloyd scored in the 3rd minute. She had a hat trick by halftime. And, it's great. This is a celebration of Carly Lloyd. But at the end of the day, not necessarily a showcase of the great quality, the showcase of the great soccer that the U.S. can play. It was too much. We were too much for Paraguay. Then on Tuesday, September 21st, the teams ran it back with a similar result. The 2020 bronze medalist again won by a large margin, this time 8-0. Rose Lavelle shined in her hometown of Cincinnati, scoring first and registering 3 assists on the night. Alex Morgan recorded a hat trick, and Katarina Macario scored a brace, with Sophia Smith and Carly Lloyd adding 1 goal each. I think that's actually a positive. I do want to take a moment to talk about this. Rose Lavelle was great. It was great to see Alex Morgan get a hat trick. It was awesome to see Katarina Macario score twice. That second goal was a banger. And it was good to see Sophia Smith get involved. Similarly, in the first game, Mal Pugh registering 3 assists was really good. So those are positives you can take and build on as you go forward. Paraguay did manage a shot on goal in this match. It was, I think, 15-1, but they only had 23% possession. It just, these weren't competitive. They just weren't. And they never were going to be. That's the thing. Paraguay is ranked 50th in the world. They have played just 1 match this year, back in April against Japan. They had some friendlies scheduled against Colombia in the summer that were canceled because of COVID, I believe. And I think from what I've been able to research, basically their women's professional league basically was on hiatus in 2020 because of COVID, which is not unique to Paraguay. A lot of countries had that issue. Trinidad barely has gotten back to playing men's professional soccer, let alone women. So, it was never going to be a decent test for the U.S. It was maybe nothing more than just 90 minutes of exercise. Maybe just a glorified training session with, a little bit more than just cones to mark out, spacing on the field. I do think it was a little bit more productive for Paraguay than the United States. I'll talk about that before I get really into discussion about the U.S., but I do think for Paraguay, other than the actual score line, it was good for them to be able to get onto the field again. I would have liked for them to have been more competitive. I think that the scoreline doesn't help, and I think just being scored on doesn't help at all. Their goalkeeper was, I'll be quite honest, really bad. And I think of all the things that I can really take from this series of friendlies, and there are a couple, but the biggest one was that a lot of the goals the U.S. scored can't be extrapolated to a normal game, right? It wasn't like, this was just a really easy way to break down a defense because Paraguay's defense was unstructured, which is true for a lot of those goals. But a lot of the goals scored in this series were because the Paraguay goalkeeper just honestly was not very good. And that's discouraging because it's hard to take away a lot of these when the goalkeeper comes out for a cross that's not there, or comes off her line to get a through ball that she had no hopes of getting to, or just quite honestly misses, doesn't do the simple task of shuffling across her goal well enough on a cross. So that part is really the unproductive take from this all, is that Paraguay's goalkeeper was really bad. I'm hoping that this maybe is more of a result, again, of the just lack of playing time, because goalkeepers, I will say, it's hard to train at match level all that often. But it was just, that part was really bad. But at the same time, the U.S. has played a lot of matches like this, especially during 2021, and I think that has a lot to do with COVID and just travel restrictions. That is the unfortunate reality of what we live in today. Hopefully 2022 and beyond is not as restrictive for travel. But the U.S. has played other teams like this and had similar score lines. So we started this year out with a set of friendlies against Colombia, winning 4-0 and 6-0. We beat Argentina in the She Believes Cup 6-0. And then right before the Olympics, we beat Mexico 4-0 and 4-0. Also beat Jamaica 6-0 in the June's friendlies. So You know, we haven't had a whole lot of great competition this year, but at the same time, hey, that New Zealand game in the Olympics was still 6-1. So it's not like this is just because we're playing Colombia or South American or CONCACAF teams. I mean, New Zealand has been at the World Cup basically ever since it started, and they're not putting together great teams either. Well, I shouldn't say since it started. They've been a mainstay of the Women's World Cup for a long time. Let's just put it that way. But it's not like U.S. Soccer hasn't tried to put together competitive matches for the women's national team. You still have the She Believes Cup where you played Canada and Brazil. But this is a perfect example of how COVID affected it, right? We were supposed to play Japan. Japan had to withdraw because of COVID restrictions and problems within their team. We replaced Japan with Argentina, and that was a significant downgrade in talent and in quality. But we did play Sweden and France in April. The one match that kind of sticks out for me here is the Portugal match where we only beat them 1-0. I think that you look back at that and it was still very one-sided to the United States. We just, I think their goalkeeper played really well and we were a little untidy in front of goal. But the problem is that the U.S. women's national team and many top women's teams, right, many of the top 10, are just vastly better than the majority of the programs they face. That comes down to funding, longevity of the actual program itself. It comes down to disparity in quality. It's just the unfortunate reality. In 2021, the U.S. women have played the numbers 26, 6, 7, 35, 2, 5, 30, 51, 28, and 50 teams in the world in friendlies or non-competitive matches. Because She Believes Cup is, as much as we say it's competitive, it's really not the same as a World Cup or an Olympics, right? So there were some high numbers there, or some low numbers there, I should say, some highly ranked teams, right? We had Canada and Brazil in the She Believes Cup. We had Sweden and France in April. But outside of that, the competition level just wasn't very high. Now, the other problem with this, as I said, is that many of the teams in this part of the world just aren't on our level, to be quite honest. Yes, we have Canada. Yes, we have Brazil. But after that, it's just not great. I mean, even look at Mexico, who are probably granted, they should be better, more competitive in CONCACAF than they are, but we beat them 4-0 and 4-0. It's not great. For these windows especially, the September and then the October windows that we're about to play, UEFA has World Cup qualifying. So we can't even find a team like that to play. I would doubt that Canada would have wanted to play us after coming back from their gold medal, especially beating us in the Olympics. That let them relish that for a little bit. Mexico and Colombia played friendlies, but, if would we have wanted to play one of them again? I don't know if we would have wanted to play another set of friendlies against them this year. Brazil, I don't know, why we didn't schedule them, but again, we played them back in the She Believes Cup. So would you want to repeat that competition? Now, could we have looked to some Asian teams? Sure, we could have. But we are doing that for October. So there's that. And we also don't know what their travel restrictions are for both their federation, their country, and then, players themselves. It was going to be hard to find someone who's really that competitive. I want to go back to that Portugal game. They're ranked number 30 in the world, which is not very high. We won 1-0. And so, you can say like, oh, well, because they're a European team, like, we didn't beat them the way that we have the other teams. And that's sure a somewhat valid take. But the stats were still incredibly flawed like they were in this Paraguay game. We outshot them like 26-4. We had 14 corners to their 1. We had 65% possession. Again, this is just the unfortunate reality of women's football. So we do play Korea next. They're the number 18 team in the world. So hopefully it's a bit more competitive than this. And I do expect the results to be closer. But I know, are we looking at 3-0? 5-1? What does closer mean? Are friendlies against these supremely outmatched opponents productive? No. But they're unavoidable to an extent. And that's kind of how I feel about this. It's fun to watch, but at the end of the day, it kind of gets boring after a while. So I tweeted about this, and I'm glad for the people who responded. Pretty good number of votes, but by no means scientific. Just wondered, hey, what do you think of these lopside friendlies? And the options were unproductive, still good, love them, or no opinion. And 71.7% of the respondents said they were unproductive. 17% they were still good, and 9.4% said no opinion. So I think that I'm somewhere between the unproductive and still good, whereas I think it's fine to get the girls out there to play, right? I think getting, especially some of the younger talent like Sophia Smith, Mal Pugh, Katarina Macario, getting a girl like Andy Sullivan, who needs time in this system, needs time with her teammates to understand a little bit more of the program, get used to them, get used to how they play on the field. That's positive for a girl like Andy and for players like Mal, Sophia, and Katarina. That's where these can be very productive. It's just bringing in new blood. Is it productive for Carly Lloyd to score 5 goals against them? No, that doesn't do anything for us, especially when a lot of those goals were just bad. The goal, especially she scored in the second game. I mean, it's a great Carly Lloyd goal. It's very typical of her just being in the right place at the right time. But the goalkeeper just coughed up and it was terrible. I do want to read some comments from this. I think that there are some salient points. So U.S. Soccer Corner, you know him, Caleb. He will probably be back on with me to talk about the roster soon. He said, I wouldn't go as far to say that they're unproductive. I'd say they're mishandled. I would still schedule them, but play extremely young and inexperienced lineups. I feel like they're just wasted opportunities to find much needed depth. And I think I most agree with that take there is we don't need to see Rose Lavelle and Alex Morgan and Carly Lloyd or Becky Sauerbrunn play 90 minutes in these games. We don't need to see them play 60 minutes. But we do need to see Jane Campbell getting a start in matches like this. That's great for her to just build confidence, understand what it's like to be wearing that USWNT badge with the 4 stars over it, right? Like, I mean this, that not in a bad way, but that is a heavy thing to have to understand. It's like, I am a U.S. women's national team player. I'm sure that has a lot of weight to it. And these types of friendlies can still give them that opportunity. You have a stadium full of girls and fans, because I go to these games, but specifically the young girls who are looking up to these players with, wide-eyed and awe. It's good to get that. So it is. I agree with Caleb there from USMNT Corner. Follow him on Twitter. That they're mishandled, and I would rather see some of the younger talent take the stage more prominently in friendlies like this. Also got to see Casey Kruger a lot, so that's a positive. Lou Owiha, I hope I said your name right, that, at Kenny Sloth on Twitter, said that he's happy the kids can see them in person. Rose Lavelle homecoming productive for the thousands that showed up. Absolutely, Lou. I think I kind of agree with you on that it's cool to see players do that. I am a little shocked that U.S. Soccer didn't find a way to play one of these friendlies in Harrison, New Jersey for Carly Lloyd, since this is her send-off, like she's retiring. A little shocked they're playing them in, the Midwest, but I agree that they're fun for that, right? The girls don't care that it's 9-0 and this game was not going to teach us anything about how well we can defend a counterattack from a team like Sweden, which we didn't do very well at the Olympics. They cared that we scored 9 goals and saw Carly Lloyd score 5, or that they saw Rose Lavelle score 1 in front of her hometown, and a girl from Cincinnati or just outside there can be like, oh, that's Rose, I can be like her, and that's great. That is a positive. Soccer Dad at WB Soccer Dad on Twitter, go Mountaineers. They can be useful for integrating young players into the group as long as they're used for that. And again, I think that is a good take on that. This is one that I actually liked a lot. U.S. Men's Soccer Bot at U.S. Soccer Men's Bot on Twitter should be played away. More away games for the U.S. women. And I asked them to kind of expand a little bit more on that, because I think it's a salient, I used that word already, I think it's a new point of this. And it's not necessarily new in the fact that I think a lot of people have felt this before, but new in the fact that we haven't heard this. We just don't hear this come up a lot. And yeah, it's potential hostile environments. When the games are being played away, it's obviously a little bit more harder, would be more fun, and would level the playing field. And I joked, I said, instead of beating Paraguay 9-0 at home, we can beat them 5-0 in Asuncion. But I am not against this idea. It does add a little bit of a level of difficulty. We looked at the Sweden and France matches in April were played in Sweden and France. I loved that. I loved that we took a trip to Europe, maybe not at that point in time, but I'm glad that we took a trip to Europe to get the girls, a little bit more acclimated to playing in a more hostile environment, or, it just ramps up the intensity a little bit more because now you're playing on France's home field in the hub, or in Stockholm against Sweden. It's not Stockholm, wherever it is. Solna, something like that. It's in the arena just outside of Stockholm. Maybe Paraguay wouldn't have been the best place to play an away game, but, you could have played an away friendly against another South American squad like Brazil or Argentina. Especially maybe this year, you could have gone to Colombia to play, right? A trip to Colombia in January? Sign me up for that. And I think that U.S. Soccer Men's Bot has a point about this. Maybe U.S. Soccer needs to look at scheduling some away matches. Now, I also think, and this is a little bit of the American arrogance coming through, and I will admit this, that playing an away friendly would help grow the women's game in that country, right? A little bit like the Dream Team in basketball helped develop international basketball from 1992 on. We saw after the second game against Paraguay, a lot of the Paraguayan players and U.S. players taking pictures together. The U.S. players were signing autographs for the Paraguayans. And I don't think that's a problem at all. Like, I think that's really cool because, again, this is the U.S. women's national team. I don't care who you are. These are the best of the best in their sport, right? That is a really cool experience for the Paraguayan players and something that they can hopefully take to inspire them to continue to work hard and improve their game. I hope they do. I think having more better women's players in the world is going to make women's football much better. But imagine putting the U.S. women in front of putting them in Asuncion and playing against a Paraguayan crowd. I don't know if that would sell a significantly more amount of tickets, but I would assume that the U.S. women going to a game in Paraguay would be a big deal, right? The U.S. women are a brand of themselves. They are bigger than soccer. They are bigger than, U.S. soccer. They are a thing of their own. And maybe, just maybe, playing a game in Paraguay against, Paraguay gives the Paraguayan Federation a chance to look at how a really well-run program can be run. Gives a chance for fans to see top-level talent and gives them a chance to see, just gets them acquainted with their team, hopefully, and gets them to see that they have women's soccer too. So maybe that is an idea. We play some of these friendlies on the road. We don't play friendlies on the road a lot. We just don't. Maybe we should. That might be a fun thing to look at. So thank you to US Soccer Men's Bot for that particular take on Twitter. Again, follow us on Twitter at SoccerForUsPod to respond to polls like that. And when I ask for comments, I appreciate everyone who responded. I do want to talk about some positives from this before I get out of here. I think that if you want to talk about a Carly Lloyd celebration, this is great. She scored 5 goals in the first match, matching a program record. She added another in the second friendly, 6 goals in total. That's awesome. A great way to allow her to shine. That was awesome. Really liked that Catarina Macario played about 120 minutes total and scored a couple goals. That is good for me. If you've been listening to this podcast, I think Catarina is a very important figure as we go forward. Maybe, not the most important player on this team, but she is going to be a very important and influential player for this national team as we go forward. I think her playing and scoring goals and being very involved in the attack is a positive. And again, an example of how these friendlies can be positive for the team. Love that Andy Sullivan started and played all of the matches. She played all 180 minutes. Looked mostly good. Can't say she was tested much. She does need to pick up her tempo a little bit in the midfield. I think that would be the biggest criticism I have of her. Granted, she didn't have any real pressure from the Paraguayan midfielder or front line, but she can be a little bit quicker as she gets the ball to both turn and get the ball off of her foot. She did get caught in possession once or twice. But she looked very good on set pieces, especially executing very similar runs to what Julie Ertz does. And she got a goal on one. So that is a positive, I think, because if you're looking at who's replacing Ertz, one thing that Ertz does better than just about any holding midfielder in the world is she is a threat on set pieces unlike anyone else that I know or have seen. Because she can get a head on, that flick on from the near post, just generally being a big, physical, just amazing presence there. And I think that if Andy Sullivan can give us similar production, that will be a positive as we go forward, because we've learned Julie Ertz can't play every minute of every match. She's currently still rehabbing her injury that she got before the Olympics. She's not playing for Chicago anymore right now because she needs to actually get that healed and taken care of. Last two positives, Mal Pugh and Sophia Smith both played significant minutes. I think these two were significantly missed at the Olympics. We needed a little bit more pace on the wing or more options on the wing. And only having Lynn Williams as your pacey winger didn't really suit us well. Mal notched 3 assists in the first match. Sophie got a goal and an assist in the second, and I think that is massively important. I think those two players getting significant minutes in this set of friendlies is the best thing that could have happened. And again, to echo what a lot of people said responding to my tweet and what I have said earlier, I think that should be the purpose of friendlies against lower ranked competition, is try to get younger talent or newer talent into the team so they can get used to playing for the U.S. women's national team, get used to wearing those 4 stars above their crest, and get used to playing at the international level. So, to sum it all up again, you can't take a whole lot of lessons from matches like these. You can look at some positives. You're not going to be able to assess many negatives. And if you do have negatives, then it's not a great thing at all. But ultimately, these aren't really friendlies that you're going to learn a lot from, but you can sit back and enjoy the goals that are going to be scored. These friendlies may not be very productive, but unfortunately they're a little unavoidable, just based on the fact that the U.S. plays in a federation and a hemisphere that doesn't have a whole lot of investment in the women's game from top to bottom. I think CONCACAF is doing better with that, but individual federations have to step up. And also just the sheer fact that there's still a talent gap in women's football internationally. The U.S. may be very well matched up against Canada, but outside of that, it's tough to find a team that can match up real well. But we go again in October against Korea. It'll be the number 18th ranked team in the world against the number 1 team in the world. Hopefully they're a little bit more competitive, and hopefully we can learn some actual things about this team in the wake of a disappointing Olympics for the U.S. women's national team. All right, so before we get out of here, I do want to remind you all that we will have a U.S. men's roster reaction episode coming up very soon. I will have Caleb Cook from USWNT Corner to talk with about that. We will have that coming up. So subscribe to Soccer Down Here on the podcatcher you are listening right now. And that will make sure that you get this episode of Soccer for Us when it drops. And you'll get every episode of Soccer Down Here and all the other content from the SDH Network. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerForUsPod. And thanks for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.